Hello, my name is Matthew Taylor, and welcome to our Winter Bush Broadcast webinar. I'm very excited to be bringing today's session to you live from our Bon Bon Reserve, which is near Coober Pedy in South Australia, and it's on World Environment Day. First up, we're joining you today from the land of the Anakaringa Martu Yakanjara peoples, who are the traditional custodians of the country I'm sitting on today. And I'd like to pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that to other Indigenous Australians who may be joining with us online today. We, of course, recognise that this remarkable Australian environment that we all strive to conserve is on land that's never been ceded, and it's our responsibility together to look after it in perpetuity. Now, as always, if you've got questions from the chat conversations today, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen and say good day to us now if you'd like to, and tell us where you're calling from. It's always nice to know where people are calling from around the country. Put those questions in at any time during the webinar. We'll get to a session at the end where we'll attempt to answer them all. Well, you may remember that I was last out on reserve for our Scottsdale webinar in New South Wales. And at the time, we were having to acknowledge that there'd been some horrendous flooding up in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales after Cyclone Alfred. Well, this time I find I'm doing the same, but it's to acknowledge the fact that in the Hunter region and the mid-north coast of New South Wales, they've just had also some pretty horrendous flooding. And while those waters have receded, there's obviously a lot of difficult cleanup and emotional impact from that flooding, which all seems a bit strange when I'm sat here with Karen and Wayne on a very chilly day, on a very dry day in South Australia, which has got areas that are actually already in drought. And it very much feels like we're sitting in a new normal in a changing climate, doesn't it?
Yes.
Not necessarily a pleasant one. But on a brighter note, I've been able to spend such a lot of time at Bush Heritage Reserves over the last 10 years. And I'm forever humbled by the gifts that nature offers us. And Bon Bon is no different. So you're going to have a ball today listening to the stories from Bon Bon. Each time I'm on country, I'm reminded that conservation takes a lot more than just the work you do today. It's the work you do tomorrow and into the future. It's a long-term game, and it requires a vast interconnected network of people and skills, all listening to the land and all learning to what it needs and adapting to it. And that's something that Wayne and Karen are very familiar with. So welcome. Thank you for a long introduction and sitting through it while shivering out on this rather chilly day.
No worries. Thank you, Matthew. It's good to be here. So, yeah.
Yesterday it was calm and still and beautiful and just what you'd expect on a warm winter's day in the arid zone. And today it's trying to rain, but of course, being the arid zone, it's only spitting and teasing you. Okay, but let's find out a bit more about Bon Bon. Wayne, 17 years ago, we purchased this property. It's one of our longest held, isn't it?
That's correct.
Can you tell us how you and Karen came to be here and to look after this enormous property?
Karen and I, so I've come from Adelaide, and both of us worked in the environmental space. Karen was teaching at the local school, and I was working for the NRM board, local one in Adelaide. And then we saw this the job advertised for a manager and a field officer. And both Karen and I have done site work in this environment and that before, so we thought this would be a nice challenge and a very rewarding job. And it's turned out to be both of those sort of things.
Fantastic. Well, perhaps you can tell us a bit about what Bon Bon is and what the natural landscapes are here.
Yeah, well, Bon Bon's a very large property. It's about 216,000 hectares, which is about the size of Greater Sydney. So it is quite a large reserve to look after. And being so large, it has quite a lot of different features and vegetation types on there. To the north of the property, so you get a lot of the Gibber Plains and the Keenapod sort of country. And then as you come south, you start to come into the Mulga woodlands and the Western Mile woodlands. A lot of sand dune systems on the reserve. We have a large salt lake in the middle of the reserve, Lake Puttridge, and all the drainage systems that are on Bon Bon drain into Lake Puttridge. So there are a number of freshwater lakes and saltwater lakes on Bon Bon. And when we do get the good rains and that up here, so the place just comes alive with bird life and yeah, so it is very spectacular.
But it hasn't rained since September, you told me last night.
No, it's
That's a long time.
we haven't had any decent sort of rain site for quite a while now. Um, the only rain we've had is like what's attempted to happen today, but we don't get too much, so it has dried right off. So it can be very harsh out here, but it's very much a boom and bust sort of environment.
And when you
for it to
arrived,
be in.
you had a good it was in a
Yeah,
boom. Yeah.
yeah. When Karen and I first came here, so we were very lucky. So we had two good wet seasons, and it was spectacular. So the lakes had quite a bit of water in it. Attracts all the bird life
Yes.
that comes along with it. So it can be quite spectacular when we get the good seasons.
And is fire an issue here at Bon Bon?
Uh, this this type of country, fire is not a major issue here. The last major fire we had was in the 70s. So a lot of the country won't carry a fire. And yeah, so it's not a real major sort of issue in that. It's like on the reserve, but we still do make preparations for a fire, so creating fire breaks and maintaining sort of tracks so that we can get around. And yeah,
I noticed you were very happy about getting one of the graders from Evelyn Downs, weren't you?
I was extremely happy about getting one of those. We have about
Tonka toy.
we have about 800, well over 800 kilometres of tracks.
That's enormous.
Like on the reserve, that all need to be maintained. So we need to have access, like around the reserve. So yes, it was a very handy acquisition for us to acquire.
Excellent. Now we that's mentioning infrastructure there. I know that's close to your heart, and there's a lot of infrastructure that needs looking after, isn't there, on a station like this? Even if it's not a pastoral property, and it's always a lot of swearing. I see. So yeah, what does that sort of job involve?
Yeah, well, because this used to be a pastoral property, a sheep grazing property. There's lots of sub buildings on the property. So we have the main homestead. We have what used to be the cook's kitchen and the cook's bedroom, a mechanic's cottage, an overseer's cottage. So all of these buildings are close to 100 years old. So they just naturally need repairs and maintenance. So like on them,
like the one you're seeing now, that's a big crack.
Yes, that was our bathroom, and that wall was deciding to part company with the rest of the house. So we needed to get work done on that. And then as well as the tracks that we've talked about as part of the infrastructure, that's another important aspect that we need to maintain and keep on top of. So yeah, so there's always plenty of work.
Plenty to do.
There is plenty to do.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the main threats to the landscape here. Obviously, being a pastoral station originally, it was probably fairly degraded. But there's ongoing threats, aren't there, from various pests? Can you tell us a little bit about some of them?
Yeah, and that's probably one of the major activities and tasks that we do on the reserve is threat abatement. From a weed point of view. So buffel grass is our major weed that we need to deal with. It's pretty well documented the threat that buffel grass causes. We have the main Stewart Highway that runs through the property, so that's the main vector point, I suppose, for buffel grass entering Bon Bon. So we try and keep on top of the highway, and then we map and monitor the buffel grass infestations, and then just go back and revisit them So we've recently got some new equipment to go and spray buffer grass that's inaccessible. From a vertebrate pest point of view, foxes, cats, and rabbits are our major one, which is probably sort of the most common ones all over the place. So we haven't got any of the other ones. So we have at the moment we've got some trapping and tracking of cats and foxes so that we can try and work out where they spend the vast majority of their time, and then we can put in a more effective and more efficient control program. And the rabbits, we engage the traditional owners, traditional custodians, so to come and do warren mapping for us. And then we can go and control the rabbits once they've done the mapping and that type of thing.
Fantastic. Well, let's talk about traditional custodians. And Karen, I know you've have had lots of recent contact with local people, and it'd be great to hear about what other activities you get involved with on site.
Oh, so we get on very well with the Willis family. Lovely people. They'll pop round and we'll have a tea or a cup of coffee. Sometimes we'll even go and have a meal around a campfire, which is really nice. And I think it's those casual conversations when you have with people that you start to learn more about what they are and what they sort of what's important to them. So we've had them recently. We had a group of the women's group came, and they and they came and we shared stories and we talked and they reconnected with country, which is lovely because they're historically a lot of them were born here, grew up here.
Oh wow.
Spent a lot of their time here, met their partners here, and it was really lovely. We shared a lot of stories, we talked, we learned so much about the history here.
And some painting.
We did some painting.
Fantastic.
We had some lovely painting sessions and some beautiful artwork from it, which was nice. And we've also had the Oodendala Aboriginal School.
Oh, wonderful.
That was, I think that was one of the highlights. It's really lovely having the kids here. We went through and we showed them, I think that the idea was that we like to show them some of the opportunities for careers in conservation. And so bush heritage, we showed them things like tracking, and we showed them weed control, what we're doing, and the impacts these things are having on conservation. So a lot of it was, we did some cooking with them, some bush cooking. So a lot of it was about trying to get them reconnected and show them what we can do. And hopefully some of that is going to embed them in them, and then they can sort of look at conservation as a career and maybe even come work with bush heritage, which would be wonderful.
Fantastic. And I understand that your daughter was here when the ladies were here as well, and was helping you in transcribing some of the knowledge that you acquired of the women's business.
Yeah,
How lovely to do that as well.
Yeah, so Mikey was here helping out. And some of the stories, it's just, I think you start to realise the spiritual connection that the traditional custodians have with this country when you listen to the stories. And that's when you start to say, well, this is actually really precious and something we need to protect.
Yeah, how lovely. Fantastic. Well, we all know that conservation is a slow burn and that benefits tend to be long-term and gradual. And that's particularly true in the arid zone, where stuff may grow for a couple of good seasons and then have setbacks for, up to a decade. So getting the incremental wins are important. So I'd love to know, Wayne, if you can tell us some about the actions that have been taken over the years to support the restoration of the landscape and what that impact's been like.
So when Bush Heritage purchased properties, they removed the stock slot from the properties to try and reduce that total grazing pressure. That's been occurring, and then shut down all the alternative water points. which is one that's on the screen there now.
Yeah.
So this reduces the kangaroo sort of population. So there's a number of things that they do on there. But being in the rangelands, everything is dependent on the rainfall. And as the rainfall is so very much reduced out here as opposed to other areas, so like of the country, everything takes a long time to recover.
Yeah.
It was like when we were out yesterday, Matthew, and I showed you those sheep pads.
Yeah.
That you can still quite clearly see
Still
in
visible.
the landscape.
Yeah. 17 years later.
Yeah, we've had no stock on here for 17 years, and then it looks like the sheep have been walking down there last week. So everything takes a long time to recover out here. So there are a number of things, and maintaining our boundary fences to try and restrict sort of wandering stock. They tend to look over the fence and see this nice green growing grass there, and then want to come over and get it. So that's another a major part of the work that we have to do, is to maintain our boundary fences and
relations with the neighbours, I guess, as well in the process.
And having good relations with the neighbours. A few times we've had the neighbours' stock on the property, and I've rung the neighbours up, and they've quite promptly come over and retrieve their stock.
That is a sign of good neighbourliness, isn't it?
Well, yes,
speed of response.
Yes, it is. So having good neighbourly relations, is very important.
Yeah.
It's like out here, and it helps.
Well, particularly with a big property. Karen, you were saying to me yesterday, when I was out going for a drive, you said if you break down near the boundary, call the neighbour because they're nearer, and they'll be happy to help you out if you get into any trouble. So that's really important when you're out and about on your own, isn't it? I think
when you have an expanse like this and neighbours aren't just next door, it's really important to know that you've got connections with people that can help you out. And like what Wayne said, it suits them for us to take to them, come and get your stock, because they're not going to do so well here.
Yeah.
So
it's
and they're nice people.
Yes. And that social element's very important in the bush, isn't it?
Yeah.
Having good connections.
Yeah.
Well, now I'd like to show a quick video, which is going to be about just how important soil is to the landscape. It's something that scientists have only in recent years really begun to understand in detail. And we had a lovely lady called Kate Matthews doing a PhD who came and did an internship at Bon Bon, and she was looking at the significance to ecosystem health of the soil. And we've talked in other webinars about the importance of the soil crust that builds up as a bunch of algae and fungi and other microorganisms in which seeds can rest, and they get wetted by the rain, and that forms a perfect seed bed for the seeds to germinate. But they had a whole lot more. And so last week I was able to interview Kate, and we'll just play a little video and she'll tell you. She was actually in Germany, so it's very kind of her to join us early in the morning. She'll give you an update on her work for the Seeding the Future programme.
It'd be great to understand a little bit about your background, what's got you into science and conservation, and what you're doing currently.
Yeah, so I'm a PhD student at Flinders University. I actually started, my background is in wildlife conservation biology, which I did at the University of Adelaide. And from there, I had a really keen interest in plants and restoration, and I kind of saw this space where soils were under-recognized and underappreciated. And so I kind of made my way into that, did my honours, and now I'm doing my PhD in the effects of sustainable practices on soil ecology.
Well, listen, tell us about the work you undertook at Bon Bon last year.
Yeah, so as part of my PhD, I was lucky enough to undertake an internship with Bush Heritage last year. I reached out to them, and they were interested in soils, and I was interested in soils. And in particular, we were interested at how the soils on Bon Bon have changed over this 15 years of destocking. Have they improved or recovered in any kind of way? And so to explore that, I worked with Pat Taggart, and together we designed a study to compare the soils on Bon Bon and those on active sheep stations. And we looked at watering points because, of course, those are hotspots for grazing pressure and often show the most severe soil degradation. And so we looked at the watering points and we made little transects at the 0 mark and 0, 25, 50, 100, 200 meters out, and collected some soils, did some ground cover surveys. And what we were really trying to identify is, okay, are there any differences between Bon Bon and the sheep station? And if there are they quite localized to those watering points, or are they more broadly spread out?
Got you. And perhaps it would be helpful to understand before we get on to what you found out is, can you just explain what the main impacts of grazing are on soil biology?
Well, yeah, I think when we talk about grazing generally, it depends on where you are, of course. But I think, particularly for Bon Bon, we're in arid environments, and you pair that with Australians' incredibly old, incredibly fragile and nutrient poor soils, they're going to be especially vulnerable to degradation, soil compaction, nutrient loading through fertilization, reduction in ground cover, and these are all gonna affect the soil biology because they're responding directly to their environment. So in particular, if we think about vegetation, you're reducing biomass, removing litter, or even shifting plant community composition through selective grazing. You're also changing the type of carbon and the amount of carbon that's going to go into the soil. And because carbon is essentially microbe food, you're then influencing the microbial communities that are there, and that in turn changes the functions that they're able to provide to the ecosystem more broadly.
Well, let's move on to the results of your research. I know it's always a bit cheeky to ask early on how your PhD results are going, but what would you say you've discovered or learned in the process?
Yeah, I mean, so it would have been this time last year, I was on Bon Bon and doing the survey. So we have some preliminary results. It's exciting.
Excellent.
And what they showed really is a very promising recovery path for Bon Bon. So compared to the sheep station, Bon Bon had much lower nutrient loading from fertilization, like I mentioned, and we saw much higher ground cover and litter, which are of course very important. One of the most encouraging things that we found was that beyond the 50 meters of the watering point, a lot of the soil properties were actually very similar between Bon Bon and the sheep station. And that tells us that grazing impacts on the soil are quite localized and most concentrated near the watering points. And so once that pressure is removed, the broader areas of the rangeland seem to recover fairly well. We also looked at microbial diversity, of course, because I'm a soil ecologist, and we found some really cool results in that on the sheep station, microbial richness, if you can imagine, was quite low at the watering point where it was quite heavily degraded. And then as you moved outward from that watering point, the microbial diversity increased. But on Bon Bon, what we found was, irrespective of distance from watering point, richness was consistently high across all sites, which is an awesome sign because it shows that Bon Bon supports a really diverse and stable microbial community, and that they're able to perform those functions, and the functions are bouncing back.
Fantastic. So that's, even though the soil might have been compacted and might have been a bit bare, the microbes were actually richer and were recovering.
Yes. Yes. I mean, it's not all perfect. Phosphorus levels are still quite high on Bon Bon, which is, legacy effects, and some a little bit of compaction around those decommissioned watering points as well. But look, it's a very low productivity, low rainfall system, and so I think overall it showed a really positive trend. And that the longer Bonbon stays is stocked, the more time it has to continue improving.
Excellent. Well, listen, my last question is, what are the actions you think Bush Heritage can now take to continue improving soil health and therefore, benefiting the overall landscape? Because obviously letting nature do its thing is one part of the answer, but are there any practical land management solutions you can think to recommend?
Yeah, I think the first thing is projects like mine, right, which kind of create that baseline of monitoring and knowing what's there to begin with, which is really important, taking interest in that. My supervisor, Tim Cavagnaro, he said to me many years ago that soil biology or microbes, all they need is what we want, right? Which is food, water, shelter, and someone to look after them. And so
Nice.
planting, making sure there's enough, reseeding, making sure that the soil's covered and giving it time to recover. I think all in all, Bush Heritage is doing a really awesome job in being that person to look after the soil biology.
Well, fantastic. Well, Karen and Wayne will be delighted to hear your faith in their land management skills to look after the property. Thanks very much for being part of the Bush Heritage family and contributing your expertise and skills.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
Well, that was a lovely chat I had last week with Kate, and you can see just how inspiring young person early on their career and the difference they can make. So now I want to talk to Karen, if I may, about sandalwood. Last year during a webinar at Uradi Reserve, I was talking to our ecologist Fiamma Riviera, who's doing a sandalwood re-veg project. It's a very important shrub in the landscape. I know you don't like to give any particular vegetation more importance than another, but Fiamma certainly did, and she talked about the work that Richard McLennan was doing on his PhD work on the property. And I believe Richard's been here at Bonbon as well, hasn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
Tell us about it.
Richard came out with some volunteers and we had a look and we looked for stands of existing sandalwoods.
Yep.
And we found actually more than we thought was there. And it was quite exciting. And we took some surveys to look at the health and recruitment. And again, better than we thought, which was also exciting. They are fairly old and they're looking their time. So,
well, like me and Wayne, you say.
I didn't say that. For your words. But yeah, so they're there, they're existing, and they're producing seed, which is really exciting. So we hope to keep looking after them. So we want to be able to put more into the landscape. So we're sort of doing a bit of a project where we're sort of putting out seed so that we can get them growing, and hopefully they'll survive, because what's a desert without sandalwood?
We've got a video showing now of you putting one into your seed bank garden yesterday with the help of someone.
Oh yeah, I don't know if help's the right word. Let's just say watchful. So yeah, we did a bit of propagation here. We tried different propagation techniques because the seed itself is quite hard.
Right.
So we tried different ways to be able to ensure that it's going to, set seed and shoot. So we've got a few seedlings like this. So what we were hoping to do is we're putting a lot more into our garden over there. We've got a special fenced off garden where we're going to grow them and maybe keep them as a seed bank. And so we put some in, and when we were with the traditional custodians, the ladies planted some out too in their name. So that was really nice.
Excellent.
And here you go. This is for you to plant.
Oh, very special. This is World Environment Day special. See, that is a really tough. I mean, you'd have to stamp on that to break it. So I imagine that needs the seed coating.
Rice.
Yeah,
Using the
breaking
vice.
or breaking down with water.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So
Well, thank you. That's a very special treat. We talked about sandalwood being important, but it has been harvested, hasn't it?
yeah. So
Extensively,
yeah.
which is that why there's not much in the landscape?
That and grazing, because they've, any new shoot's very delicious. So the minute it pops its head up, it does get eaten quite.
Yes.
So a lot of them, you'll find the sandalwoods have actually grown well in amongst other plants. They do like
yeah.
friends to grow with, so
Yeah.
they do like to grow with, companion plants.
Yeah.
But a lot of them are sort of tucked away in amongst, the dead finish and some other prickly plants, which means that they get a better chance of shooting up. So yeah.
And Richard's work highlighted just how important the leaf litter underneath sandalwood is, wasn't it? So a lot of insects and a lot of bird foraging was happening under sandalwood, preferentially to many other shrubs, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So very important part of the ecosystem.
They are. The birds love them.
Well, it sounds like we've got lots going on here, which leads us, of course, is to manpower and who does all this work. And I think you said to me this morning that you couldn't do the job without volunteers. Is that right?
There's a lot of area here, and of course, we can't do it just on our own. And most bush heritage reserves are the same, and so volunteers are really, really, really an important part of the work we do. And the range of skills in our volunteers is huge. So we have anything from electricians to gardeners. We even have people that do decorating and painting and masonry. So all of those things, even though they're not direct conservation work, they're all things that help keep the reserve running. And they come here and do work for us, which is great. And a lot of them help us and show us what to do. So a lot of the things we're guided by what they say. So, when the mason says do this, we can say, okay, we can do that. But then they also get the joy of being able to contribute to conservation, and hopefully they're going to take a little bit of that home with them and share within their own community, so they can see the work we're doing. They can see how important some of the bush heritage things that we do contribute to helping restore a lot of the ecosystems. And then when they go home, they hopefully will take that with them in their heart and be able to push that on.
Well, talking of long term and the landscape, I had the pleasure of having supper with you and with two of our longest serving volunteers last night.
Yeah.
Meredith.
Yeah. Oh, lovely people. And they just epitomize what it is to be a volunteer. And everybody loves them, and we just love having them there, and they just work so hard for us. And they've been most reserves. I think they've been over most reserves. But
they started volunteering when Bush Heritage moved its head office from Tasmania to Melbourne. And that's beyond my lifetime. It's a long time.
Yeah, they've been around a bit, which is really good. And we love having them here. And they're coming back again a couple of months when we have a supporter event here. So to help out again. So even the little things that volunteers do, you go, oh, I hadn't thought of doing that. Thanks for doing that. That's just freed up, 4 hours of my day that I can go and do other things, which is good.
And Ronnie was saying last night exactly your point about how much he loves the fact he learns a new skill when he comes somewhere.
Yeah.
So at what, 90s is he, or late 80s?
Late 80s.
Late 80s. Still learning new skills, still contributing new skills, which is a really lovely part of being the Bush Heritage family, I think, isn't it?
It is. And the fact that we can get things out into the community as well, and get the community here. And I think that's really important. I think that's something that Bush Heritage holds dear. And I think we love it. We love having different people here all the time. Yeah. It's really nice. So
part of the social fabric.
More the merrier. Come on down.
Excellent. We'll put a link in the chat if anybody is inspired to volunteer and wants to come out to Bon Bon, which I can certainly recommend. Before we get to some questions, and we started getting them coming through, so just a reminder, if you've got any questions for Wayne or Karen, please stick them in the chat. But before we do that, we've got a final video from our ecologist, Pat Taggart, who I bumped into briefly as arrived a couple of days ago, and he was going out with one of our PhD students to chase down a kangaroo and fit a collar to it. So it was all very exciting. They disappeared off into the night. So here's Pat talking about some of the other work that he's doing in the arid rangelands. Hi, Pat. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Well, thank you. Good to see you too.
Where are you calling us from today?
Today I'm calling in from Ghana country around Adelaide.
Nice. Now, we'd love to know a little bit about you to start off with. You've been with Bush for about a couple of years, haven't you? What's your background and what got you here?
Yeah, that's correct. My background is in ecology, and I sort of was very fortunate in that I grew up in a family where my dad was an ecologist, and that definitely had an impact on myself and sort of spurred my interest and passion in ecology and the environment.
Excellent. Well, you mentioned your dad there. I believe he's actually involved at Bon Bon as well, isn't he? He's got a project there.
Yeah, so he's had a student in the last few years, a PhD student, working on wombats. Wombats is one of his main research interests over 20 or more years now, and he's had a PhD student do a bit of work on Bon Bon, in particular looking at the microbiome of wombats across a rainfall gradient in South Australia. So I think they had 3 sites, one in the Murraylands, South Australian Murraylands, one on the Eyre Peninsula, and then Bon Bon, which was the lowest rainfall site in their study. Bon Bon is sort of right up towards the northern extent of the southern hairy-nosed wombats distribution. And they're interested in the microbiome because the microbes in our gut help us to extract all those important nutrients that keep us healthy and well.
Excellent. Well, you may or may not have gathered, but I'm a bit of a keen birder. It usually comes out on these webinars. So last time I was there, I was chasing the chestnut-breasted whiteface and trying to find one for Bob Brown, who was with us, who really wanted to see one. And we were lucky. We did get one at the end of day 3 or something. But you've got a project going on that at the moment, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. So for listeners who may be unaware, chestnut-breasted whiteface is a South Australian endemic bird. Particularly occupy the arid rangelands of South Australia, and Bon Bon seems to be a bit of a hotspot for them. We can typically find them with reasonable reliability, but we had over the last several years now, there's anecdotally been some suggestions that they're declining in abundance and distribution. And so we were keen to reassess their population, basically, which hasn't, for like many species, and particularly species that are in hard to access places and endemic, their populations don't get assessed very often. And so there was some broad surveys done by an avid birder, Lynn Pedler, back in the 1990s, where he went to 40+ sites across the South Australian rangelands, surveying for these birds and counting numbers. And so our project really revolved around trying to revisit as many of his sites as possible to see if the birds are still there, in what sort of numbers, and I suppose re-quantify and reassess where the population's at. Unfortunately, it does seem like there has been a bit of contraction in their distribution, particularly from the eastern and northern edges of their distribution. We did still find good numbers of birds in some places, but they're very patchily distributed and appear also to be more likely to be found where there's been some recent rainfall as well. But one of the tricky things of studying animals like this is that they are rare species, rare birds, and it's hard to learn a lot about something that's difficult to find.
Especially when it moves around in response to rain. Yes, that can be hard, can't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, I also know that there's some fairly innovative work happening around how Bush Heritage monitors landscape health, both on reserve and off reserve. And that's something you've introduced recently, haven't you? A tweak to that that's going to help us in the future. Can you take us through that story?
The ecosystem health monitoring is something that had been going for quite a number of years, but had typically just focused on the reserve. But by adding the off-reserve sites and having some control reference points, it really gives us a much stronger study design and ability to attribute changes in our changes in ecosystem health to our management. And so yeah, it's really quite early days. Only being 2 years in, this sort of work takes a lot of time to collect the data. And analyze it to get results and meaning out of it. One of the challenges of the arid zone too is that you go through these boom bust cycles where more than anything else, rainfall is by far the biggest driver of environmental change and species and ecosystem health out in the arid zone.
Indeed it is. Well, listen, thanks, Pat. Thanks for giving us that insight into your work, how important it is to, as well as managing the country, having your skills and that of the rest of the ecologists applied to actually measuring our impact. And look forward to catching up with you next time I'm over your way.
Not a problem. Thanks very much for having me. Always happy to chat.
Fantastic. Cheers, Pat. Well, we've had a great introduction via several people to what life's like on Bon Bon, and it's time that we got to some of your questions. So I'll jump straight in and see who's best to answer some of these. The first one came in from Colette, who's asking about the salt lakes and whether they're natural or whether they're influenced by, salination of the soil.
The salt lakes in the rangelands around here are all natural. As opposed to the salt problems that they have over in Western Australia from land clearing. So all the ones around here. And just as a matter of interest, they are significant sites for traditional owner custodian women.
Right.
So they're quite important to the women, the traditional custodians. So.
And there's a linked question from Helen was asking about does Bon Bon, is it in the catchment for Lake Eyre, Katitanda, or is it separate?
No, it's a separate catchment. So all the water going into Lake Eyre at the moment comes from Western Queensland. Yeah, so we're a bit further south.
And there's also a question again to do with the lakes, but the freshwater lakes, I think. Do our surveys and any of our sort of assessments include the freshwater lakes? And this comes from Morgan, who is indicating that they're a retired aquatic entomologist, so may be able to help.
They had a bio-blitz up here just after Bush Heritage purchased the property. Whether there was water or not in the freshwater lake then, so I'm not too sure. But there's a very, very small window of opportunity to do that because it dries out very quickly and you need to have a reasonable amount of rainfall to get water into it. So I couldn't answer that one.
But things like the shield shrimps and the frogs are ready to go, aren't they?
The frogs, we had a trapping event here a couple of years ago and we had significant rain during that trapping event. And we caught more frogs than we caught anything else. So they're all sit there and wait there. Then the rains come and then out they all come.
It's amazing how a soft-skinned, breathes partly through its skin animal can survive in the arid zone.
When you get months on end of 45 degrees, you would think a frog wouldn't last too long.
It just takes rain. When we had the floods here, it was just crazy with frogs. You could hardly sleep because you could just they were everywhere and all you could hear all night was frogs croaking. It was really lovely though.
Such a contrast to like the nights I've been here when it's been absolutely silent. Only wind noise, that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah, nice. Well, a question again, I think for you, Wayne, from Bruce is, what about fencing, internal fencing on the property? Is that still there, or is that?
There is still some soft fencing there. A lot of it is very old. On our eastern boundary, we have what they call a vermin-proof fence, and it was essentially built to keep dingoes out of the property before they put the dingo fence in. But the internal fencing is in varying degrees of suitability. I suppose a lot of it's fallen over. It's made out of old mulga and old Western Mile posts. So it's been in for 60, 70, 80 years. So quite a bit of it has fallen over. And
Well, I saw some yesterday where the posts were standing perfectly well. I think you'd probably taken the wire out and that had been removed around the stockyards, but the posts go on forever, don't they?
Yeah. There are a few that's still standing and some that still have the wire go through them. So
but generally our policy is to take out internal fencing, isn't it, when we can, when we got
power.
Because
it can be a bit dangerous at times because they run alongside the tracks. If you have fencing wire hanging off the fence, it can be.
And it's a nasty trap for animals too. The fencing wires, so it's a yucky way.
You mentioned dingoes. The question here from Merwin, are they around, or has the dingo fence, which is north of the property, is that right?
North of the property.
So basically no dingoes.
No dingoes.
No. Okay. So Merwin was asking about whether they could help with the cat problem, and yes, of course.
Yes, and that will be an interesting project because Bush Heritage have got purchased Evelyn Downs, which is on the northern side of the dingo fence. They have dingoes up there. It'll be an interesting contrast between the two, but it has been shown that top order predators keep other predators at bay.
Yes. And there's a question from Rob about the length of the Stuart Highway that actually runs through Bon Bon. And I know we're sat on the old Stuart Highway, which went through all the properties, amazingly. Would have been a very long, tortuous route to the north, but the new road is a very fast road, isn't it? You've got a sense of how long that is? How much of the...
Yeah, well, Bon Bon is about 70 kilometres by 30 odd kilometres. So the new Stuart Highway goes all the way through Bon Bon. So it'd be a bit over 70 k's because it goes off at a bit of an angle. So it's the full length of Bon Bon. Yeah.
And does that interfere? You mentioned buffel grass earlier on, as that's a way that it gets in on seeds on the underside of cars. Is there anything else that problems that contributes to having the highway there? Too many people coming and camping.
In the tourist season or in the cooler months. So the traffic that goes up there is pretty busy. Sometimes we get a bit of a problem that people just decide to take a track off and go camping because they don't go in the designated rest areas and that. I had to go and have a chat to a few people the other day that had done that thing.
A polite chat, yeah.
Well, yes, and just remind them where they are, that they're on a reserve and they're in the Woomera prohibited area. The day before I had a chat to them, Woomera, the Department of Defence, were firing missiles around the place. So it is it can be quite dangerous. So that's a bit of an issue as well too, that we get people just pulling off the side of the road and camping wherever they think's a good looking spot.
Now we've got a question from Linda about native mammal survey results, and acknowledging that may be a question for Pat, but any insights on what small mammals there might be?
Yeah, we get it's like a number of different small mammals. So the medium-sized ones have all gone from the landscape. A lot of hopping mice and done up. But
you had a halter season before last.
Did
We
you?
got a couple of
Ah,
cobwebs,
lovely.
which is very exciting.
Yeah, so, but Pat knows more about that, being the ecologist, that does the analysis of it and
Yes.
so that type of stuff. So,
And the wombats.
And of course, the southern hairy-nosed wombats that are down at the southern end of the property, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. They're moving their way up here as well too. So a bit further north.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
They're on the march.
Yeah,
On the march.
they are.
You will regret it if they start undermining your house.
Well, yeah, that's
We'll
not
have Put a new wall up.
Yeah.
There's a question from Joseph, which is about any plans we might have to reintroduce any mammals onto Bonbon, and mentioning the greater bilby as one that other organisations like Arid Recovery have populations, but I don't believe we've found the magic formula yet to make that a success, have we?
No.
No, it needs a lot of work on fox and cat control to get it down to really very, very low levels, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Before the reproductive rate of the bilbies or the bettongs is sufficient to handle the predation pressure.
Yeah, and I think we need to get to get it back up to speed so there is food for them.
Yeah.
So as much as we have, it's Bush Heritage is doing a great job with Bonbon, we still need to get that food level.
More to do.
Yeah, and more soil.
But it's a very valid question, Joseph, because we did consider it and did a fair bit of research on reintroducing the burrowing bettong, and Bonbon was going to be one of those test sites, and we were going to get the animals from Arid Recovery, who we have a partnership with, and they have great numbers of those behind the fence. And Arid Recovery are the people who are training these bettongs and other animals to be predator aware. So putting a few cats in behind the fence to actually train them up before they get re-released. But it's something we'd love to do on the Bush Heritage Reserve. But from an ethics point of view, you can only really do it if you're really confident that they're going to survive. And we're not there yet, but with your support and ongoing interest, we hope one day to, I hope one day to come back.
Well, yes, it will be good.
Barbara's asked a question. Is there any evidence of natural recruitment of sandalwood?
There is small amounts,
Mm.
but we're getting there. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Excellent.
yes, Barbara.
So it is working.
Fingers up. I hope
Excellent.
it keeps going.
And Bill and Mary have also mentioned that given sandalwood is a hemiparasite, so it taps into the roots of other shrubs. Do you plant them, when you do plant them, do you put them near potential hosts next to acacias? Or,
Absolutely do.
Yeah. Part of the protocol.
And we grow them with little friends as well.
Put them in with friends,
When we propagate them, we make sure we put another seed with them.
Very important. A weather question. Any real rain since the floods in 22? Bonbon?
Nothing.
No, I think it was about that year we may have had 250 mil of rain. Our average yearly rainfall long term is 150. I think it was about 22.
Cool.
That we had 250 mil. But since then, we've probably fallen back to the long-term average or a bit below.
A little bit below,
So it's been pretty dry.
Yeah, the drought map I looked at this morning for South Australia shows the worst affected areas are sort of south and east of Adelaide at the moment, aren't they? And here it's just about on the border of being declared drought.
Yeah.
So it's dry, but
Yes.
question from Jenny. Yes. Are there any camping areas on or close to the reserve?
No.
Camp.
There is camping facilities available at Mount Eba. So you can go to Mount Eba during the cooler. They're not open during the hot season. But you can camp there.
Yeah.
There are 2 rest areas either side of the homestead, one when you first come into Bonbon on the Stewart Highway and one as you leave the homestead road further north. So you can certainly camp there, stay overnight there.
Yeah.
But if you want full camping, Mount Eba's the place to go.
Or
you could volunteer.
I was going to say that's the natural lead in.
Volunteer.
Jenny, if you want to volunteer, then please connect up, and there's opportunities for everybody of any age and any skill set. There's always something to contribute. Question from Carter. What predators apart from cats and foxes live on the property?
Natural predators.
It doesn't say, but I guess an answer natural and unnatural.
Mainly your birds. So
I saw some wedge-tailed eagles yesterday.
Wedge-tailed eagles.
goshawks,
goshawk,
Okay, yeah.
brown falcons.
brown falcons. Yeah.
We have a good variety of birds of prey here.
Yeah.
So quite a lot of sort of bird predators, but mammal predators. Yeah, cats and foxes.
They're
So like pretty much it.
And you've got sangoannas. They're fairly effective predators, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're good.
It's like in their own right.
they're pretty
We have plenty of sangoannas about the place.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lovely question here I've been saving till the end, which is, what's your favourite part about working at Bon Bon? Perhaps you'd like to each have a go at that one.
Oh, favorite part about working. Favorite part. I think it's just being a part of it. I think just being and waking up in the morning and knowing that you're going to do something constructive today, regardless of what it is. You know that somewhere in your day you are going to contribute towards conservation, which is really lovely. Seeing things change, with the sandalwood and a lot of the new miles coming up, that's always exciting. Just being here, being a part of it. The red dirt gets in your blood.
I've heard that said before.
It's sort of addictive.
There's something about it.
What about you, Wayne?
I like being in this environment and in this space, and you're doing something different every day. You may go to bed at night with a bit of a plan in your head as to what you're going to do the next day, and then you wake up the next day, and that plan's totally out the window, and because something's broken or something.
Yes.
The weather,
something urgent needs to happen, or the weather changes. So it's just a constant sort of change and that here. And it's just, I just love the environment, and that is just like beautiful. So find it challenging. I do enjoy a challenge, but it's just a beauty out here. But it is a harsh beauty as well too. So you have to respect where it is that you are and understand it. But yeah, it's just a magnificent place to be.
What do you think, Matthew?
Well,
What do you like about Bon Bon?
Well, as you know, it's the second time I've been here. I came here just after I started work for Bush Heritage nearly 10 years ago. And then it had really good rains and it was magnificent landscape. So coming back and driving up here from Adelaide, seeing it get drier and drier, like you said, I had to change the optics, change the lenses almost, and look at it through, this is normal, it's part of the cycle. And you look for the beauty in small things, you look for it in a saltbush plant, or you look for it if you're in a wetland. On the way up, we visited one, there was some samphire, and a samphire salt marsh is just unbelievably beautiful, but you have to look at it through prism and appreciate the beauty. So, but most of all, I'm just impressed, as always, by the wonderful people, by the welcome you've given me being here, and also to meet the wonderful volunteers who are here.
Yes.
And I will have to say an acknowledgement to Karen that during the webinar, we were interrupted by the hound who came and barked. I don't know whether you heard it. It had to be held on a leash until the video played. So there was some remarkable control being shown there. So great work.
It was a bit naughty.
It was a bit naughty.
Yes.
Well, that's about all the questions I think we got time for today. If anything hasn't been answered, we will, of course, as always, get back in touch with you after talking to the relevant expert. And a reminder, if you've had to miss any of the Bush broadcast webinars, they're all available on our website for you to access any time. And please feel free to share them with friends. I always think they're a great insight into the human part of what we do, as well as the pure conservation. Thanks you guys for being here and available, and in your busy days, taking time out to sit and shiver on an unseasonably cold day.
Thank you for making us sit out here.
We could have sat in the kitchen, but it wouldn't have been as real and exciting.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent.
Good.
And of course, thanks to the supporters who joined us today, and for those people who continue to make our important conservation work a priority. And to all the people who have contributed to Bon Bon, like Karen and Pat that we've listened to, and our volunteers. just a bit of wrapping up, I guess, a tiny bit of blowing our own trumpet. But in the past 18 months, we've acquired 4 new reserves, nearly 250,000 of hectares. And while the work on those properties is just beginning, like on Evelyn Downs that you mentioned, and with a long future ahead of it, it's just as important to come sometimes to a place like Bon Bon and see what, how many years, 16 years, has done to restore the landscape, and just how important that is. And of course, that relies on long-term holistic approach and continued investment and continued support. So thank you for doing that. And we're just about to launch our winter appeal. That's got some lovely news stories in it. So if you'd like to find out where your generous donations are going and how you're deepening the impact on the millions of hectares we now look after, our producer Megan's going to share a link in the chat so you can see our latest appeal video, which has some beautiful images. Talking of images, as always, we've got a few cracking ones to finish up the webinar. So please stick around for a couple of minutes if you'd like to see more of the beautiful fauna and flora of Bon Bon. And I look forward to seeing you next time when I will be talking to Ian McConnell, and we'll be doing a deep dive into our agriculture and natural capital programme. So that's a very innovative, very creative space that we're exploring carefully. And it's something we've wanted to do a webinar about for a long time. Now's the chance to find out what we're doing with the agricultural sector and how we're influencing them for the greater good of conservation. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Megan for producing. And thanks, Wayne and Karen, for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
See you next time.